Clipperton Island is a small, barren coral ring located in the heart of the Pacific. At the end of the 19th century, several nations battled for control of the island due to a valuable resource it contained. Mexico sent families to establish a colony, regularly providing them with supplies. But suddenly, these vital supplies stopped arriving. When it became clear someone had abandoned them, one resident was blamed as a monster. However, the real cause of their food scarcity wasn't the monster. The true horror of Clipperton Island is this. In the eastern Pacific, this unassuming island bears little evidence of the horrors that unfolded there. It's desolate and uninviting. It was likely discovered in 1521 by Ferdinand Magellan, but the official discovery occurred in 1711 when John Clipperton, an English privateer, spotted the island while attacking Spanish ships. The island was named after him. Clipperton Island covers over 9 square kilometers, nearly 3.5 square miles, and is made almost entirely of coral. It's shaped like a ring, making it more of an atoll than an island. In the center is a stagnant freshwater lagoon, eutrophic with minerals and nutrients, but home only to algae. No fish or marine life. Fish populate the seas surrounding the island but avoid the shore and reefs. The abundance of coral leaves little room for plant life, and the only exceptions are coconut trees and a few creeping plants. The island is also plagued by poisonous crabs. Over a dozen species of seabirds call it home, contributing to the foul ammonia smell that lingers in the air. Clipperton is one of the most isolated places on Earth, sitting over 621 miles from the Mexican coast. Once known as the Island of Passion, it's now more commonly referred to as an island scab, especially considering the dark events that took place there. The island became famous for being at the center of a territorial dispute between the US, Mexico, Britain, and France for nearly a century. Its most valuable resource, guano, was highly sought after by all 4 nations. Guano, a byproduct of bats and seabirds, had significant monetary value in the 19th century. In 1704, a German geographer observed Peruvians using guano as fertilizer, recognizing its potential. Upon returning to Europe with a sample, global interest in guano grew, as it was linked to larger, more abundant crop harvests. The scarcity of guano-rich areas, however, made them all the more desirable. In 1856, the United States recognized the importance of guano and passed the Guano Islands Act, allowing businesses to explore and claim these islands. At this time, Clipperton Island was still considered Mexican territory. But in 1858, French Emperor Napoleon III sent a naval unit to lay claim to the island, seeing its potential. The French made quick work of declaring ownership but didn't take further action, likely due to the island's isolation. By the 1890s, a U.S. firm had obtained permission to mine guano on Clipperton, thanks to the Guano Islands Act. They mined for a while, but in 1897, Mexico returned to reclaim the island from the French and expel the American laborers. 2 years later, the British entered the fray, with their navy considered the finest in the world at the time. Mexico regained ownership of the island, but realizing it couldn't defeat the British, it struck an agreement allowing them to extract and export guano. In 1906, Mexican military officer Ramon Arno, along with 13 soldiers and their families, was sent to establish a small colony on Clipperton to prevent it from being passed between nations. Arno had no choice in the matter. He was punished for deserting his station and was sent to the island as part of his punishment. After serving 5 months of his sentence, Ramon Arno was sent to Clipperton Island in 1906, not only as a prisoner but also as the official governor due to his skill set. This marked the end of his punishment. Later that year, the Mexican president ordered the construction of a lighthouse on the island. Once completed, a man named Victoriano Alvarez was sent to settle there. Meanwhile, the British were also colonizing the island. They built dwellings from coral and began cultivating plants. Eventually, about 100 people, including men, women, and children from Britain and Mexico, settled on Clipperton. However, the British company mining guano went bankrupt as the market for it collapsed, and the demand for guano became oversaturated, causing prices to plummet. As a result, every British settler left the island except for one family who were left behind to maintain watch. At the same time, France and Mexico, still disputing who had legal ownership of the island, decided to submit the matter to arbitration. A neutral third party, the King of Italy, was chosen as the arbitrator. While the dispute continued, Mexico was embroiled in the Mexican Revolution, which began in 1910. As the King of Italy reviewed the details of the case, uncertainty clouded the nation's future, and resources were redirected elsewhere, stalling any progress on the matter. In 1911, the regular supply ships to Clipperton Island stopped arriving. The islanders had no idea that the Mexican resistance had attacked and sunk the ships, and it seems no other ships were sent after that. By then, the British had already left, leaving just 26 people on the island. With a smaller population, they managed to make do with less food. Yet, they soon realized they were completely alone. Without any visitors, they had no way of knowing why the ships had stopped or that their country's destiny was in turmoil. 3 years later, in 1914, a U.S. ship, which had gone down nearby, brought the last visitors to Clipperton. The survivors made it to shore, and a rescue boat arrived to collect them. The officials on board informed Ramon that World War I had just broken out and the Mexican Revolution had been ongoing for 4 years. The captain of the American ship offered to take Ramon and the others back to the United States, explaining that with the revolution, supply ships were no longer a priority. They could head toward Mexico and then return to the U.S. Ramon was tempted by the offer, but hesitated. He had been sent to Clipperton Island as punishment for deserting his post, and he feared the repercussions of leaving. Ultimately, he declined the offer, but managed to get the last remaining British family onto the rescue ship. The Americans left them with some essential supplies before departing. The decision to stay behind would have disastrous consequences that Ramon couldn't have foreseen at the time. With the Americans gone, supplies rapidly dwindled. The British-tended vegetable patch withered, and the islanders were left with only the meager resources the island offered. They lived off seabird eggs and, on occasion, were lucky enough to catch a bird for a more substantial meal. Surprisingly, the island's coconut harvest and, shockingly, pigs provided them with a steady food source. The pigs, which had been brought over during the island's colonization, thrived on the island. They survived mainly by eating the island's crabs, which humans were advised not to consume due to the algae they ingested. While the pigs appeared to have enough calories, the lack of variety in their diet led them to become malnourished, eventually succumbing to scurvy. Most people are familiar with the disease, but it's worth emphasizing just how devastating its symptoms are. Bleeding gums are usually the first sign, followed by lesions that appear all over the body, burst, and fail to heal. In its most severe stages, scurvy can cause death through excessive bleeding. This is exactly what the island's inhabitants were facing. 4 years of starvation and desperate survival were nothing compared to the horrors that awaited the survivors. By 1915, only a few weak colonists remained. Nutrient deficiencies had taken a devastating toll, leaving those still alive emaciated and gaunt, their bodies a shadow of what they once were. The first sign of something tragic began when the survivors started to experience hallucinations and delusions brought on by their extreme hunger. One day, as Ramon scanned the horizon, he thought he saw a ship, the first they had seen in over a year. Though it was far off and not heading toward the island, Ramon believed this was their chance for rescue. In a desperate attempt, he convinced the other 3 survivors from the original group of 13 to join him. They launched a small boat into the water, powered by a motor, though they had very little gasoline. It would be a long, exhausting row to reach the enormous ship that was far too distant. From the beginning, it was clear that this was a reckless and dangerous venture, but Ramon's determination pushed them forward. The details of what happened next are unclear, and 2 competing stories have emerged. In one version, the men paddled far from the island, only to find there was no ship. Ramon may have been seeing things, driven by hallucinations. The other men, now completely unhinged, attacked Ramon, trying to steal his gun and kill him. In the ensuing struggle, all 4 men fell overboard and drowned. Some claim the men couldn't withstand the strong tides and rough seas surrounding the island, while others say the boat simply capsized. Regardless of the exact cause, the women on the shore did nothing as the ocean claimed the men's lives. Before the women had a chance to mourn, a storm began to form. Unbeknownst to them, it would soon become a hurricane. Ramon's wife, Alicia, urged the remaining women and children to seek shelter in her basement. She, heavily pregnant, joined them in the hope of keeping them safe. But the pressure of the situation triggered her labor, and on the very day she witnessed her husband's drowning, Alicia gave birth to a boy in the basement, enduring the pain without any medical help. When the storm finally passed, the survivors emerged to find the colony in ruins. The houses had been leveled and the few remaining coconut trees had been uprooted by the fierce winds. As they assessed the damage, they saw Victoriano, the lighthouse keeper, approaching. He had lived alone in the lighthouse or in a hut nearby for nearly 10 years, far from the rest of the colony. Now, he was the island's last surviving man. Victoriano began his grim task by collecting all the firearms from the wreckage, sparing only the governor's. He then made his way to the shoreline where he threw all the weapons into the water, except for one. He declared himself the king of Clipperton Island and claimed ownership of every woman on the island. Victoriano spent the next 3 years abusing and terrorizing the women, treating them as his property. Any act of disobedience was met with cruel punishment, and his twisted desires led him to alternate between the women, subjecting them to relentless abuse. It became clear to everyone who he would target next. The cycle of torment continued, with Victoriano taking one woman at a time into his hut, where he would assault her until his interest waned. One day, he did something he had never done before. He chose a 15-year-old girl to join him. The women watched, powerless, as her mother tried to protect her by stepping in front of her. Tragically, Victoriano killed both the mother and the daughter in front of the others, showing just how far his cruelty had gone. Except for one woman, the others were too terrified to defy Victoriano, having witnessed firsthand the horrific punishments he was capable of inflicting. Tirza, a 20-year-old woman, was the exception. She was openly defiant, refusing to bow to him despite the terrible consequences. She constantly expressed that Victoriano must die if they were to be free. Even when the women were alone, Tirza insisted that their only hope lay in his death. Sadly, her rebellion could not prevent the inevitable. On July 17, 1917, it was Tirza's turn. She spent a few days in Victoriano's hut, her defiance offering little protection. As time passed, Tirza noticed Victoriano's increasing visits to the women. He would approach from a distance near the lighthouse, signaling that he was losing interest in her, and that someone else would take her place as his favorite. Victoriano spared Alicia from his advances in the years after Ramon's death. It was unclear why he had shown her such favor. Perhaps he had grown tired of the other women, but his reasoning remained a mystery. One morning, Victoriano silently instructed Alicia to meet him at his hut at dawn the following day. Tirza, unable to bear the situation, rallied the others. Alicia had become a mother figure to them all, and Tirza could not stand the thought of Victoriano targeting her, especially given their similar ages. The women, now united in their resolve, quickly devised a plan. They had discussed assassinating Victoriano for some time, but had hesitated due to the risk it involved. Hearing that Alicia was next, their fear turned into a burning desire for revenge. The following morning, as Alicia obediently made her way to the hut, Victoriano appeared in a good mood, cooking a bird outside. The scene felt eerily fitting, given the violence that was about to unfold. When Tirza appeared with Alicia, Victoriano's mood soured. He immediately began berating Alicia for bringing someone with her. The two argued as they approached him, with Victoriano shouting at her. Meanwhile, Tirza had snuck into the lighthouse and grabbed a hammer. She nodded at Alicia, her eyes filled with determination. She raised the hammer high and struck Victoriano with all her strength. She brought it down again before he fully understood what was happening. Tirza struck him down just as he tried to make a move on Alicia. He collapsed onto the coral floor, writhing in pain as Ramon Jr. emerged from the lighthouse, wielding the weapon. Victoriano screamed in agony, but Tirza wasn't done. She returned to the hut, brandishing a knife. She lost control in the moment, straddling Victoriano as she continued to attack him, transforming him into an unrecognizable mess. The women, exhausted and relieved, let go of their pent-up emotions, sobbing uncontrollably. When they finally returned to the colony, the other women found them covered in blood. The horror of what had just transpired was undeniable, but the sense of liberation was palpable. They wept together, embracing each other in their newfound freedom. Then, a surprising twist. Ramon Jr. shouted to his mother, pointing excitedly toward the horizon. A U.S. ship was approaching the island. It was the Yorktown, a naval gunship sent to investigate reports of German activity in the Eastern Pacific. The Yorktown had received intelligence suggesting that German submarines might be operating in the region, and Clipperton Island was a suspected base. The ship had circumnavigated the island, searching for a way to land, but the reefs and high tide made it impossible to dock. Still, they could see the women and children waving, signaling for help. This time, it managed to breach the coral and sail dangerously close to the shore. Alicia, filled with urgency, sprang to her feet and rushed to meet the crew. There, she recounted everything that had transpired, her voice trembling with the weight of the horrors they had lived through. The crew listened in stunned silence, their dread palpable as they processed the grim tale of survival. The women were eventually calmed by the crew, who then asked what supplies they needed before leaving the island. A few of the men accompanied them to the homes that still lay in ruins. When word of Victoriano's brutal actions spread, those who had been searching for him simply left his body for the crabs to devour. With the survivors now aboard the Yorktown, the ship set sail for Salina Cruz, Mexico. The women, reunited with distant family members, slowly began adjusting to a new life after spending so many years isolated in the middle of the Pacific. On July 22, 1917, a large crowd gathered in Salina Cruz to welcome the survivors. Alicia's father, who had spent years desperately trying to uncover his daughter's fate, was among them. For 7 years, Mexican officials had told him the colonists had perished, dismissing his inquiries. Alicia's reunion with her father, along with the surprise of 4 grandchildren, was an incredible moment of joy and relief. The crew of the Yorktown was celebrated by the city, honored for their bravery and generosity. Months later, the United States Navy would prepare the official report, omitting any mention of Victoriano's death. This ensured that Alicia and Terza would be protected, with no consequences for their actions. For over 17 years, no one spoke of the murder, and the women lived in peace, knowing they were safe. Finally, in 1931, an Italian king ruled on the sovereignty of Clipperton Island, awarding it to France, with Mexico choosing not to dispute the decision. The island remained largely abandoned, though it still held some significance throughout the 20th century. Since then, no nation has attempted to occupy Clipperton Island. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. I look forward to sharing more with you in the next video.